Assalamualaikum. My name is Shahirah Binti Ahmad Fadrizah. In this video, I will present about crimes against humanity. For introduction, the concept of crimes against humanity emerged only recently at the beginning of the 20th century, well after the concept of war crimes emerged in the 19th century. The Nuremberg Charter was the first multilateral legal document to explicitly provide for the prosecution of crimes against humanity as a discrete charge from war crime. The legal principle of crimes against humanity was established in large part to rebut the debate that international law did not apply to criminal acts committed by a government against its own civilian population, a matter that was traditionally considered to fall solely under the jurisdiction of a state. Fundamental to the definition of crimes against humanity is the commission of widespread or systematic atrocities against civilians such as enslavement. States have frequently protested to the extension of international law so deeply into the domestic realm of action, and they have suggested a number of extra restrictions limiting the applicability of this principle. The Nuremberg Charter of 1945, for instance, permitted prosecution for crimes against humanity only if the alleged crime were committed in connection with or in execution of a crime against peace or a war crime. Now, it is widely acknowledged that crimes against humanity can be committed during war, peace, and even in the absence of armed combat. However, nations continue to be hesitant to grant international agencies the jurisdiction to investigate or prosecute crimes other than those committed during international armed conflict. Next is United Nations. Since its founding in 1948, the United Nations have been largely tasked with prosecuting crimes against humanity. For nearly 50 years following Nuremberg, there was no international court with jurisdiction over crimes against humanity. However, the United Nations continues to develop the definition of crimes against humanity. In 1947, for example, the United Nations General Assembly entrusted the International Law Commission with the formulation of the principles of international law recognized and strengthened in the Nuremberg Charter and Judgment, as well as the design of a code of offences against the peace and security of mankind. Complete 50 years later in 1996, the draft code classified crimes against humanity as murder, extermination, torture, enslavement, persecution on political, racial, religious, or ethnic grounds, institutionalized discrimination, arbitrary deportation, or forcible transfer of population, arbitrary imprisonment, rape and forced prostitution, and other inhuman acts done systemically or on a large scale and instigate or directed by a state. This definition varies from the use at Nuremberg, where the illegal offences were required to have occurred before or during the war, hence proving a connection between crimes against humanity and armed combat. Next slide is about International Criminal Court. The Rome Statute definition contains the most comprehensive list of particular criminal acts that may constitute crimes against humanity to date. Article 7 of the Rome Statute mentioned that for the purpose of the statute, crimes against humanity refer to any of the following offences when conducted with knowledge as part of a widespread or systematic attack against any civilian population, such as murder, extermination, enslavement, deportation or forcible transfer of population, imprisonment or other severe deprivation of physical liberty in violation of fundamental rules of international law, torture, rape, sexual slavery, enforced prostitution, forced pregnancy, enforced sterilization, or any other form of sexual violence of comparable gravity. Persecution against any identifiable group or collectively on political, racial, national, ethnic, cultural, religious, gender, or other groups that are universally recognized as impermissible under international law. Enforced disappearance of person, the crime of apartheid, and lastly, other inhuman act of a similar character intentionally causing great suffering or serious injury to body or to mental or physical health. Next, during 20th century. According to various sources, the 20th century ranks as the most violent era in all of human history. As a result of the fighting, the life of millions of innocent babies, kids, adults, and elders were taken. The death toll among civilians was one for every death among military personnel. These atrocities against humanity were committed despite the efforts of the International Committee of the Red Cross, international humanitarian law, and the rule of warfare. Because there was a lack of a common term with which to discuss such violation, new terms had to be created. Parallel to World War II, war criminals did not worry about being caught, tried, or imprisoned. Winston Churchill, Prime Minister of Great Britain, advocated for the open killing of war criminals. The United States took a more forgiving stance and demanded a fair trial. A number of legacies came about as a result of the British government being persuaded to hold the Nuremberg trial. These include the effective documentation of the history of massive crimes through legal procedures, the worldwide jurisdiction for serious war crime, the establishment of international war crime tribunals, and the success of UN court in holding impartial trials. The United Nations cited International Criminal Court, Rome Statute Article 7, which described mass atrocities committed against a civilian population. The term atrocities encompasses a wide range of wrongdoings, including but not limited to murder, genocide, slavery, bondage, forcible population transfer, incarceration or deprivation of physical liberty in violation of international law, torture, forced prostitution, rape, discrimination, tyranny, apartheid, and other atrocities. According to a published by Trial International, data on crimes against humanity has been compiled since 1990. These include the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, adopted in 1998, and the Yugoslavia and Rwanda International Criminal Tribunals, respective statutes, adopted in 1993 and 1994. The latter has the most up-to-date and comprehensive catalogue of atrocities committed against civilians. As for 21 centuries, 21st centuries, in 2009, a study on human rights in Palestine and other occupied Arab territories, United Nations researchers stated that Palestinian organization had committed war crimes against Israel that may amount to crimes against humanity by shooting rockets and mortar into Israel. Since then, the armed Palestinian forces have committed this type of war crime and crime against humanity in every battle between Israel and Gaza. Concerning the fire of rockets and mortar into southern Israel by a Palestinian armed group operating in the Gaza Strip, the mission concludes that the Palestinian armed organization failed to differentiate between military objective and the civilian population and civilians' object. The discharge of rockets and mortar that cannot be accurately focused at military targets violates the fundamental concept of differences. When rockets and mortar are launched into civilian areas without an intended military target, they represent an attack on the civilian population. These activities will amount to war crimes and possibly even crimes against humanity. However, in 2019, investigators from the United Nations concluded that Israel forces may have committed crimes against humanity, and according to investigators, 189 Palestinians were murdered during the Gaza protests, including 35 children, 3 healthcare professionals, and 2 journalists who were shot with live ammunition. Amnesty International has charged Israel with the apartheid crime against Palestinians. Next is crimes against humanity under communist regimes. During the 20th century, communist governments committed crimes against humanity, such as forced deportation, massacres, torture, forced disappearance, extrajudicial killings, terror, ethnic cleansing, enslavement, and starving people on purpose. In Cambodia, scholars agree that the Cambodian genocide, which was carried out by the Khmer Rouge under the leadership of Pol Pot, in what became known as the Killing Fields, was a crime against humanity. As a result of the communist utopia experiment, the Pol Pot regime was responsible for the death of about 2 million people over exhaustion over the course of 4 years. These deaths were caused by starvation, exhaustion, being put to death, and not getting medical care. In 2018, the Khmer Rouge was found guilty of genocide against the Muslim Cham and Vietnamese people, who were a small part of the population. And in 2022, an appeal against a court's decision to convict was turned down. It showed that the ECCC still agrees that the Khmer Rouge discriminate against North Khmer minorities and tried to get rid of them. The naming of the Cambodian genocide is a problem that isn't talked about enough because it downplays the pain and misery of the minority group that were aimed and the significant role that racism played in how the genocide was done. In conclusion, since the end of World War II, when the traumas of the Nazi regime became known, people all over the world have been worried about crimes against humanity. The Nuremberg Charter became the guiding light for how rules should be made about this issue. After this, the people who did this were punished by law like the Genocide Convention and the UN resolution. But we still don't have a clear or encompassing system that can punish those who break the law and give the victim justice. And human rights are getting more attention, but they are also being broken more often. It is time for the international community to make the laws stronger and protected human rights and the sacredness of humanity. That's all from me. Thank you.